Praise be to the Lord. The Lord is great, and greatly to be praised. He is to be feared above all gods. We just have to determine which God we're talking to. So I think this message is going to be very interesting. I think it's going to be very clarifying, very enlightening, as we look deeply into what the Bible is saying and all the miracles, some of the miracles that occurred. So let's start right away at John 6, 45 and 46. It is written in the prophets, and they shall all be, it says, they shall be all taught of God. Every man, therefore, that has heard and has learned of the Father comes to me. Not that any man has seen the Father, except he which is of God. He has seen the Father. So while searching for other verses, I found these verses, and I said, wow. At first I thought Jesus had said that only he had seen the Father, which would agree with the verse from John chapter 1, which we don't know who wrote. The people who put together the Gospel of John wrote it, apparently. Or it could be John the Baptist. It's not totally clear. Whatever the case was, we've determined that that's not true. John chapter 1, verse 18. Clearly, So, did Jesus say the same thing also? And the reason I said that was because I was looking at another version. I wasn't looking at a Textus Receptus or a King James or any of the versions which are taken from the Textus Receptus Greek text, which reads differently. So what they have done is they have perverted this verse, because this reads correctly. And this is the way I always understood it, and I always interpreted it correctly because of this one word right here, of. So I'm going to show you all kinds of verses, corrupt verses, and the reason why. I'm going to tell you the reason why I'm right and all the versions are wrong. All these other versions have corrupted. All the modern versions have corrupted, once again, have corrupted this verse right here. These two verses, really, when you consider that this is the context. And I'm going to talk about that too. And that's how you know what this should say is by the context, by this verse, by verse 45. That's how you know. That's the context. Well, that's how you know what 46 means. But what all the modern versions have done is they have twisted it, perverted it, and changed it into harmony with that verse 18 of the first chapter of John, which is a false premise. It's a false statement. It's not true. Jesus did not say, no man has seen the Father except me, because this is what all these other versions are saying. They're trying to say that, they're trying to make it sound like Jesus said that he was the only one that has ever seen God, and no man has seen God. So before I read all the stuff I have here about that, I got the Strong's information right here. See it? Right here. on the word seen. This is the word, he has seen the Father. He which is of God, he has seen the Father. So what they were trying to do is they're trying to make this be about Jesus, this verse 46. And what it really is, it's about people. This verse right here is talking about people, not Jesus. And the modern versions, even the NIV, I looked up the NIV, I'm not going to have it here, but it's saying the same thing. It's all the versions. I have three translations, just as an example, to show you how all the versions corrupt that, and they make it about Jesus, as if this statement right here is about Jesus, when it's about people. And we know it's about people. I know it's about people. We all should know it's about people because of verse 45. Let me read it again. It is written in the prophets, and they shall all be taught of God. See, we're talking about all the people. Jesus was talking. He was talking about all the people. He was talking about a verse in the Old Testament. So I tried to find the exact verse. There's many verses that talk about the people being taught. Taught about the commandments. There's a few of them. There's not one verse. So it's talking about all the people here, the way Jesus is saying it. It says, every man shall be taught. Every man therefore that has heard and has learned of the Father comes to me. So he's talking about how when people hear of the Father, they're taught of God, they hear of the Father, they learn about God, they learn about the Father, then the Spirit bears witness, the Spirit of God, and they start believing in Jesus because of the power of God. So the next verse goes right in line with that. Is it right in harmony with that verse 45? He says, not that any man has seen the Father. That's not phrased well at all. The way that is, the way that's phrased, and all the versions don't really make it. A lot of times they're not really improving it. But yet, not that any man has seen the Father, except he which is of God, he has seen the Father. So what that is saying is that not any man has seen the Father. Only those which are of God. And there's a lot of verses. I'm going to show you a lot of information about this to prove what I'm saying. So he's saying that only those which are of God have seen the Father. So now we're going to say, well, what do you mean seen the Father? But it's interesting because he's saying, not any man has seen the Father. Let me show you about this Greek word here. Before I feel like talking about this verse 46 more, but I want to explain how we know what seen means. It doesn't mean physical eyes. Okay? This is very interesting. So we have the Strong's. That's the number, G3708. We find that many, many times when Jesus said seen, well, when the translation says seen, this is the word, G3708, that is used. So you want to know, well, what does that really mean, that word, seen? So here is the Greek, and that looks like Greek, old Greek right there. And then, I really don't know why they have this stuff here, because this is not an English word, although it's in English language. So I don't know why there's two things here like this. This is how you pronounce it, horaho. But this is more, looks like English, but that's not a word. I'm sure the answer could be found, and if anybody knows, enlighten me. But this clearly looks like ancient language. This is the ancient language right here. But look what he said now. There's 58 occurrences of this word. It's properly to stare. But it means many different things. It says that is to discern, you see? So you can put these words in place. He has seen the Father, is what it says, but then it can say he has discerned the Father. He that is of God has discerned the Father. And then it says physically or mentally. And that can be just a physical experience. And it's a mental experience. By extension, to attend to, that doesn't mean much. And the stare, I don't like that. I don't like that word. I don't think that applies. I don't think that's a good word. Let's see. See, by Hebraism, to experience. Okay? So we could say he has experienced the Father. Whoever is of God has experienced the Father. And there was one version, the Passion Translation, that had put that word in there, but they also used the word seen. And we don't have the original language. We don't have a concordance for all these different versions. Many of them are just rephrasing. So he wasn't really saying that, has not seen the Father physically, but he was talking about experiencing God. Perceive. And it says passively to appear. I could say that the person has seen God appear in the Spirit. But the word perceive, that's very important. That is the one that I would come up with. So he has perceived the Father. If a person is of God, that's because they have perceived the Father through a spiritual experience of invisible power. And it says see, once again, and that's what the ones they chose, but that's a very poor word. Terrible. They should not have used that. And I don't know why it says take heed. That doesn't make any sense. So, there's a lot of problems with language. This is a big problem. Somewhat. This has been a problem all along. Is the problem of language. So what Jesus was saying is only a person who has perceived and experienced the Father is of God. It's really a no-brainer. It's really rather simple to know. And that everybody who has learned about God, taught about God, heard about God, experienced Him, perceived Him, then he is of God. Unless he rejects the whole thing, which some people may do. No, I believe. I could say I suppose, but I believe. But some people have just said, I'm not interested. Well, it's hard to say, really. Because, if you have an amazing experience, you're not going to walk away. But I think that people that walk away they really don't have a powerful experience. And so that is the key. Because I've had many times where I've had experiences, but they weren't that powerful. They were negative or whatever, and there was a manifestation of some sort, but it wasn't very powerful. And if that was all I had, then I wouldn't believe. I might not believe, possibly. But I've had very, very powerful experiences at one time or another. So here is 3 corrupt translation examples. The Faithful Version, which has been, I've found lately, is very close to the King James. They try to just make it understandable, get rid of the these and the thous and the untos. But then I found that again, that they have corrupted it many times. You know, they've changed it. They've changed the meaning. They've actually changed the meaning on occasion. You just never know when they're going to do it. That's why I almost have to compare. And if I know the King James so well that I can tell it. I can say, wait a minute, that doesn't seem right. Then I compare it with the King James, or I might compare it with the bishops, which we're going to read. Or I'm only using 13 versions right now. I was using all these other versions, like all the versions that were available. But then there were certain ones that I kept using, so I've sort of narrowed it down to the ones that I was using, which is about 13. The ones that I ended up seeing that were helpful. And so that makes it more simple. So here it is, the Faithful Version. No one has seen the Father except he who is from God. And I'm going to show you all the verses where the term from God is applied to Jesus. Jesus said he was from God a few times. And I'm going to show you all those verses in one spot. But this is what all these modern versions do, is they change that word from God and they make it, like I said, a whole different meaning. And they're trying to say that Jesus was talking about himself and that only he had seen God because he was from God. But that's just not true. I don't believe that's true. And so we see that with the other versions too. And then they can get even more radical in clarifying the corruption. Here's the Bible in basic English. Not that anyone has ever seen the Father. Well, we know that there's accounts in the Old Testament where they have seen God. And it said it was the Lord. Okay? It says, only he who is from God, he has seen the Father. Oh, so now they're making it about Jesus. They're saying only Jesus has seen the Father, not anyone. That's a totally different meaning. I believe false. We have the contemporary English version. The only one who has seen the Father is the one who has come from him. Oh, you mean Jesus, right? Well, no, well, yes, that's what they mean, but no, that's not true. No one else. See, and they really go off the deep end and go on to into that camp, and they say, no one else has ever seen the Father. Why? What do you mean? Not clear. It's not true. It's a totally different meaning. So here's the correct translation, and this was translated about 40 years before the King James. 40 years. The Bishop's Bible. Not that any man has seen the Father, save he which is of God. The same has seen the Father. So it's so simple, really. Just very simple. Very simple language. And that's the way I always have interpreted that through the years, through the decades. But then we see that the modern versions corrupt the meanings. Terrible. So here is another proof text. Here is another verse that proves what I'm saying. John 8:47. He that is of God, right, talk about of God, hears God's words. You therefore hear them, not because you are not of God. See? So that is the same idea. He's saying that people that are of God is because they are willing to hear God's words. There are many people, they don't want to hear God's words. They think they're already God, and they are complete, they're holy themselves, and they don't want to hear about any words from God. So therefore they are not of God. It becomes very simple, very, very easy to understand who's of God, who's not of God. When somebody will not listen to the words of God and they blow them off, they're not of God. Here's all the verses below that. In the King James, I took them out of the King James, of course. I have 4 verses where Jesus is referred to as coming from God. They're not all a direct quote from Jesus, but a couple of them are. John 8:42, Jesus said to them, "If God were your Father, you would love me, for I proceeded forth and came from God." See? "Neither came I of myself, but he sent me." Jesus, knowing that the Father, then we have John 13:3. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands. That means all the things that he gave to him, all the things that Jesus had were given to him, were put in his hands. It doesn't mean that he gave him all things and left and went on vacation, because that's what people believe. So Paul believed. Some people think Jesus is the Father. And then we're going to look at some verses next, and where people have totally misinterpreted, and they've started religions, and they teach that thousands of people listen every week to them talk about how Jesus is the Father because of their misinterpretations. And they don't read the Bible themselves, and the preacher certainly does not. But he'll teach you the lie, though. He'll give you some false information. And the church doctrine on the website, they'll give you the false information for sure. For sure. So, but it says, let me read it again. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he was come from God and went to God. Then we have 16. Actually, they're all in John. All these verses are in John. 16:27. For the Father himself loves you, because you have loved me and have believed that I came out from God. So that's an interesting statement, to say the least. But once again, it's talking about how he is from God. He's not just of God. Jesus was just not of God. Some of these oneness Pentecostals, they don't think Jesus even pre-existed. They think he came into existence when he was born in the earth. These are the people I'm talking about. They think that Jesus is the Father. But yet, that doesn't make any sense. How can they not believe that he pre-existed and then believe he's the Father? Well, because they believe it's just a manifestation of God. And then they think eventually, this is what the United Pentecostal Church believes, that eventually Jesus will not exist and he will be submerged back into the Godhead. And there'll only be one person. Now, that's insanity. That's religious insanity. And the last one, the 30th verse of that same chapter, now are we sure that you know all things and need not that any man should ask you. By this we believe that you came forth from God. See, he was with God, and he came into the world, and he clarified that the writings are clear. He says, I was with the Father, came into the world, then I left the world and went back to the Father. He said that. So then we look at John 14, 7 through 11. John 14, 7 through 11. And it's the same kind of a thing. If you had known me, you would have known my Father also. But from now on, you know him and have seen him. You see? So people say, oh, so Jesus must be the Father. No, this is the same word that we looked at in the Strong's. Perception, perceived him, experienced and perceived God in the Spirit. So I wrote here, only seen him work. Right. And that's why they have experienced him, because they only saw him work. They didn't see him personally. And Philip said to him, Lord, show us the Father, and that will be sufficient for us. And then this verse people have just misconstrued and misinterpreted incredibly. Jesus said to him, have I been with you so long a time, and you have not known me, Philip? The one who has seen me has seen the Father. Why then do you say, show us the Father? Now, you know, it sounds like he just went off the deep end and he's trying to say, I'm the Father, I'm him. No. That certainly can't be true. I wrote down here, because they only saw him work, but not in person. You see? So we have that same word again. Once again. And he continues and he explains. Unfortunately, he talked cryptically like this all the time. But the same word, seen, here, is the same word we looked at, experience and perception. Because they had seen the Father. That's all you're going to get, for the most part. You know, you can't expect to be brought to right to the throne of God and see him sitting on the throne. No. Although many did in the Old Testament. And then verse 10, don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? See, that's what he's talking about. That he is in the Father and the Father is in him. And the words that I speak to you, I speak not of myself. See, so he can't be the Father. He's saying he's not speaking the words of himself, from himself. He can't be the Father. But the Father himself, who lives in me, does the work. See, the Father, the Spirit of the Father, lives in him, works in him, and he's doing the works. Believe me that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. Or else, believe me for the very work's sake. So it's an amazing statement. He's saying, if you don't believe that I'm in the Father and the Father is in me, just believe because of the works, the miracles, because of the accounts of him doing all these supernatural, miraculous things. So that's what it means when he says you've seen the Father. You've seen him do miracles, because he said, I didn't do them. I didn't do them. And Jesus said, he that believes in me believes not in me, but in him that sent me. That's an amazing statement. So everybody that keeps talking about how Jesus is great and marvelous and glorious, he's saying, you're not really believing in me, you're believing in God, who sent him. And that's an amazing statement. All right, so that's the end of all that information. So now we'll get back into what I was talking about last week about Aaron and Moses. And this is a very strange story, as usual. Numbers 20, 2 through 12. And there was no water for the congregation. And they gathered themselves against Moses and against Aaron. Naturally. And the people contended with Moses and spoke, saying, oh, that we had died with our brethren. Oh, that we had died when our brethren died before the Lord. You see, and that's what I read last week, is how they were all destroyed. 15,000 people, all the leaders were all torched. They were all incinerated by God. Fire came out, burned them all up, killed them all. And then killed 15,000 people. Who knows why? We don't know exactly what disease they died of, all the 15. And then he buried alive 3 families. He totally buried alive everything involved with massive families. You know, they had multiple children and he had multiple wives, possibly. They were all buried alive. And so the people here are saying, we wish we had died also with them. That's terrible. And so why have you brought up the congregation of the Lord into this wilderness? Just think of this. So that we and our livestock should die there. That's what was going on. They took him, God took him out of Egypt and brought him out into the wilderness where there was nothing. They had no water. They had no food. Eventually he gave them the bread supernaturally, and then here we're going to read the account of him giving water. They had no water. They had nothing. They brought him out into the desert. Verse 5, and why have you made us to come up out of Egypt to bring us into this evil place? Right. Why? Why did you do this to us? It is not a place of seed or of figs or of vines or of pomegranates, and there is no water to drink. And verse 6, and Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and they fell upon their faces. And the glory of the Lord appeared to them. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, you know, I found this interesting. This is very strange. This shows you that the people that put these verses together like this, they weren't right. They took this one little statement right here, right? And they made it into a verse. This is from the Faithful Version. And actually, it's the same in the King James. So it's not just this version. And they took this little piece at the beginning of this statement right here. And it says, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, and then a comma, and they made that a verse. How bright is that? No, that's not bright. And then another verse, and then they start another verse. Why? Stupid. That's stupid. Then it says, take the rod. So God is saying, take the rod and gather the assembly. You and Aaron, your brother, and speak to the rock before their eyes. So I looked up the word speak, and I have it down here in the Strongs, just to make sure we understand what was saying, what was being said here. So according to this account, okay, here we are right here, and speak to the rock before their eyes. This is supposedly what God said to Moses and Aaron. He told them to speak to the rock. It doesn't make all that much sense, because he told them to get the rod. So it wasn't like he was just going to go up there and say, in the name of God, let water come forth. Now, for some reason, he told Moses, God told him, to get the rod. So you'd say, well, okay, so the rod has something to do with it. And I was thinking, it was very strange, this rod, because they always needed it whenever they did miracles. They needed the rod. And so it's a total mystery as to why that is. But I think that he wanted them to just take the rod, and then when they had the rod in their hand and they were speaking, their words were powerful. That they were extremely powerful, and they could move mountains, basically. They could do anything with that rod. But apparently, they couldn't just take it and do anything they wanted with it, obviously. Else they would have. But in this case, he said, you get the rod, right? And he didn't say use the rod or anything. He just said speak to the rock before their eyes. Then it says, and it shall give forth its water, and you shall bring forth to them water out of the rock. So you shall give the congregation and their animals water to drink. All right. So before I read the rest of it, this is the word for speak, okay? This is the Hebrew word for speak. It's H1696 in the Strongs. So this is clearly a Hebrew word here. It's Hebrew characters, clearly. And I don't know what this is, again, because this is not a English word. Debar? I think not. Actually, this is how you pronounce it. Dabar. So I don't know what this means. Because that's not a word, an English word. So then it goes on to say, a primitive root, perhaps properly to arrange, that makes no sense, but used figuratively of words to speak, rarely. So there it is. It says figuratively of words to speak. Then it says rarely in a destructive sense to subdue. Answer, appoint, bid, command. Command the rock. That fit perfect. Command the rock to give water. That's what he was told to do, but he didn't do it. We're going to read it. Commune, declare to the rock to bring forth water. Destroy, give, name, promise, pronounce, rehearse, say. There it is. Say, speak. be a spokesman. Look how many times this Hebrew word is used in the Old Testament. 1,142 times. Subdue, talk to the rock. Teach, tell, think, use, utter. That says X well, X work. I don't know what they mean. So it's pretty clear that that's what he said to Moses. So I say, well, why didn't he do it? You can only guess. Apparently, well, I would just guess that he didn't get it. He didn't understand. What do I know? So this is what happened when he went over to the rock. Over here. And Moses took the rod from before the presence of the Lord as he commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together before the rock. And he said to them, "Hear now, you rebels." What? "Must we bring water for you out of the rock? Out of this rock?" I said, what? Why is he saying this? Now, and I think this is the key to why God was angry, because he was saying that they were doing it. He was saying, we must bring water. So he thought he was doing it. He made it sound like he was doing it. He didn't say, plus the whole thing is wrong, this whole statement. Why were they rebels? Because they were without water. You have to have water. So this is very kind of a very mean statement, a very ignorant, uncalled for, unreasonable, totally unreasonable statement made by Moses. Because he's calling them rebels. They're not rebels. They just want some water. They need it. They need water. Didn't Moses and Aaron need water? Did they have water? Apparently they had water. No, it makes no sense. This statement here, nothing. Makes nothing. No sense at all. So you have to assume maybe they had water, but then that's very selfish to attack them like that when all they needed was water. That's all they wanted was water. That's crazy. So then the next verse, and Moses lifted up his hand, and with his rod he struck the rock twice. So he didn't speak to it. Didn't do it. He was taking matters into his own hands. He struck the rock twice, and the water came out plentifully, and the congregation and their animals drank. Well, you see, the rod was powerful, but if I was God, I wouldn't have had it work. God told them, we don't understand. We don't really know why this all happened the way it did, because God told him to speak to it. So you'd think that it would only work if he spoke to it. But he was able to hit it with the rod and bring it out. So go figure. But then, verse 12, and the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe me, and to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given them. So, like I was saying, he was saying that he was doing it. And that's the only thing I can determine. And I don't know why he's saying, believe me. Well, he didn't do what he said. Did he tell him what to say? I would have said, what am I supposed to say to it? Oh, you want me to speak to the rock? What do I say to it? But there's no information. There's no information about what he was told to do. And he wasn't saying that God is going to give you, the Lord was going to give you the water. They didn't say that. And so God was very angry, apparently. Then he killed Aaron after that because of that. We're going to read that. There's two accounts of Aaron's death. And apparently he had it with Moses. He had it with him, and he was going to bring him into Jerusalem. He was going to kill him. He didn't kill him right after that. I don't know if he killed him right away, but he just said he wasn't going to be able to go. He wasn't going to be able to go into what they call the Holy Land. And I would just call Jerusalem and Israel, whatever. So here it is. Here, and this is right after that. It's the same chapter. So this is the same chapter, the 23rd through the 29th verse. This is Aaron's death, account 1. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in Mount Hor. So I looked all this stuff up, but we're going to find out that nobody is really sure, exactly what happened because of the two accounts. By the border of the land of Edom, saying, Aaron shall be gathered to his people. In other words, he's going to die. For he shall not enter into the land which I have given to the children of Israel. Because you rebelled against me, because you have rebelled against my word at the waters of strife. That's what they're calling it. So God is saying he was the rebel. Moses was accusing the people of being rebels. But apparently God is saying that he was the rebel. And we're not really sure why, because we don't have enough information about what was said between God and Moses. And it says, take Aaron and Eleazar, his son, and bring them up to Mount Hor. And strip Aaron of his garments, and put them upon Eleazar his son. And Aaron shall be gathered to his people, and shall die there. But if you take somebody's garments off, they're naked, basically. And so this is what they claim. And this is the one account. Then there's another account that's different. Take off his garments, give them to his son, and then he's going to die. And so they brought him up to a mountain, up on a mountain. And for all intents and purposes, they just left him up there naked. Well, that's what it says. It doesn't say anything else. It doesn't say anything else. Verse 27. And Moses did as the Lord commanded, and they went up into Mount Hor in the sight of all the congregation. Well, it says all the congregation was there too. Well, that's humiliating. And Moses stripped Aaron of his garments, all of them, and put them on Eleazar his son. And Aaron died there in the top of the mount. Top of the mount. So there was a congregation. It wasn't 1,000,000.8 people up there at the top of the mount, I don't think. I don't see how that could be. But like I was saying, he died on the top of the mountain. And it says, and Moses and Eleazar came down from the mountain. So they left him up there, naked. Well, that's what it seems to indicate. It doesn't give you any other option here, really. Just left him up there alone, on top of the mountain. And when all the congregation saw that Aaron was dead, how'd they see that? Well, when he didn't come back, they left him up there, and they left the mountain. They came down from the mountain. And when he didn't show up again for a few days, a week or two, whatever, they said, that's the end of him. And they weren't going to go back up there and try to find him. It says, they mourned for Aaron 30 days, all the house of Israel. Okay. So that's the one account. Then there's the other account right here. And if you look at the context of where they were in different places. You know, if you look for where Mount Hor is, and then you look at this account down here, it doesn't jive. So we have Deuteronomy 10, 4 through 6. And he wrote on the tablets, according to the first writing, the 10 commandments which the Lord spoke to you in the mountain of the midst of the fire, in the mountain out of the midst of the fire, see? In the day of the assembly. And the Lord gave them to me, and I turned myself and came down from the mountain and put the tablets in the ark, it's Moses speaking, which I had made. And there they are, as the Lord commanded me. And then verse 6, the key verse. And the children of Israel set out from Beeroth of the children of Jechan and Mosera. There Aaron died. Hello? Are you kidding? And there he was buried. What? And Eleazar, his son, ministered in the priest's office in his place. I don't know how these contradictory accounts get in the Bible. I find it amazing. I mean, I truly believe that many of the accounts in the Old Testament were made up. They're dreamed up by somebody. I was just reading how the army of the Syrians left all their tents and all their gold and all their weapons and everything and just ran away because they thought they heard an army approaching. I think that's totally made up. I don't think for a second that happened. No, it's too preposterous, ridiculous. So you just wonder, where did these things come from? So here we have totally different accounts. We have two totally different accounts of how Aaron died. In this case, they were in a totally different place. Totally different place. If you look at the context of where they were even before these verses and in the other one, you can't even determine if they're different places. They're not even sure where these places are anyway, but they're totally different. And then it says that he was buried. So in the other account, he was left on top of the mountain. He wasn't buried. This account, he was buried. They say we buried him. Hello? Did you bury him or did you not? And this seems like the believable story here. But why would they make it up? Somebody is making up a story that's not true. They believed somehow, maybe, that this story or that story was true. I mean, they got the cities there and everything. They even have the information about where they were going, where they had come from. So you just got to wonder, And Wikipedia says this. Okay? Lastly, right here. There are 2 different places named in the Torah as Aaron's place of death and burial. Mount Hor and Moseroth, or Mosera, as we see right here. See? And there are different interpretations for the location of each of the 2.